with the Charlotte Clergy Coalition for Justice. Our main goal was to be a presence of peace in the name of Christ. There's palpable hurt and anger on every side, and I don't know. Seriously, y'all, like it's we're called to be light in dark spaces. Here we go. Continue to show up in solidarity, pray, do whatever. No justice, no peace.
Friends, hope comes when we, the church, stands up and speak out against the sin of white supremacy. Hope comes when we name it. Hope comes when we stop centering white bodies and say that Black lives matter, and say that people of color matter, that indigenous people matter. So let me rid you of false hope. There is no hope as long as you are silent. There is no hope as long as you are blind. There is no hope as long as you must be centered. But I know that we have hope because you came here today to have your eyes open and your ears unplugged. So my white siblings today, whether you are evangelical, mainline, gay, straight, trans, whatever, get in the fight, because hope comes when you realize you are not the center of the gospel, you are not the center of our faith. Hope comes when you step up and find every way to get in the way. Here's the good news. Amen.
Ray, I wish we had an audience full of people here because I feel like they'd be applauding you like crazy. And thank you for the kind of work you're doing. So, I mean, you see this stuff, and this is the kind of thing that you're doing. And I know at times it probably is heavy and it's hard. And like with all that's going on, how are you doing? Would you maybe just share with us how you personally are doing these days?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny watching that because I know that I am doing far, far less than people who really are on the front lines doing this, people who have done this since and before 2016. So I'm okay. I mean, I'm as unsettled as I've ever been.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm okay. I mean, I am now and have been a black man in America. So it's kind of interesting, the world being able to see, and the world acknowledging the reality that we've known since we could even have eyes to see.
So in our diversity and inclusivity group, we've got a couple of goals, and one of the first goals is education. So it's a learning piece, and it's not just education by watching news bites and sound bites. It's diving into some resources and some texts that have been really helpful for us here. But they say the second part of our moving forward and trying to figure out what does it mean to be more diverse and inclusive is relationship.
Yeah.
And I have really enjoyed the last several months of our lunches and our times together and just getting to hear how you see life and then being able to kind of talk and invite your thinking into the reality of this community. It's been really, really helpful, probably more so than you will ever understand. So I look at, to be honest with you, a season, a holiday like yesterday, July 4th. And one of my white friends said to me, who goes here to Watershed, that for the first time, and they're in their late 40s, they have a way and a filter in seeing July 4th differently than they might have historically when it was just a pure celebration and something our birthday to be celebrated exclusively. But there's an underlying narrative to all that, of which I think we're becoming aware of. How do you, as a man of color, how do you look at a July 4th experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I grew up in Greensboro, and I was a part of ROTC at Dudley High School. I was have always been a pretty patriotic person, right?
Yeah.
But there is really something that this holiday reminds us, is that America isn't what America has always said that she was or she would become.
Yeah.
And there is a reality, and I told you I was going to do this, but I want to read this, because I think this part of this poem from Langston Hughes that I want to read, it really beautifully sums up how I felt about this holiday. And to be honest with you, I didn't celebrate July 4th, and we honestly haven't celebrated July 4th in a minute. So Langston Hughes wrote this poem, and part of this poem I'm going to read. It starts there: the free. Who said the free? Not me, surely not me. The millions on relief today, the millions who have nothing for our pay, for all the dreams we've dreamed, and all the songs we've sung, and all the hopes we've held, and all the flags we've hung, the millions who have nothing for our pay except the dream that's almost dead today. Oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet and yet must be, the land where every man is free, the land that's mine, the poor man's, the Indians, Negroes, me, who made America, whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain must bring back our mighty dream again. Sure, call me any ugly name you choose. The steel of freedom does not stain. From those who live like leeches on the people's lives, we must take back our land again, America. Oh yes, I say it plain, America never was America to me, and yet I swear this oath, America will be. Out of the rack and ruin of our gangster death, the rape and rot of graft and stealth and lies, we the people must redeem the land, the mines, the plants, the rivers, the mountains, and the endless plain, all the stretch of these great green states, and make America again. And if you didn't know, you'd think some incredible poet wrote that today, but it was written by Langston Hughes decades ago. And it's still true today. So for me, when I think of Independence Day, the 4th of July, I think of this aspiration that has never been, but must become, that we can create, right? But in order for us to create, we can't live like it's already been created. And sometimes on the 4th of July, we're kind of, I haven't been really vocal about this because, I sometimes can be out there in people's face. Like, I didn't post anything about it yesterday except this poem, because America, at our founding, we were founded on treachery. We were founded on land that isn't ours. Yeah. Right? And that's, if that's our foundation, of course, we aren't going to become who we aspire to be. Yeah, right. But we, all of us, get to, if we acknowledge it, we get to make America again, right? As opposed to making it great, because when was it great? Great for whom? Great when? But we get to make America what we have said America should be, but isn't yet. So, and it's interesting, man. Like I was, I just finished as a pastor at a local church, and one of the things I did when I first got to this church, there was an American flag on the stage. There was a North Carolina flag, and there was the Christian flag. And one of the first things I did on the low was kind of remove that flag from the stage. Any of the flags. And I kind of put them out in the lobby at first, and nobody noticed. Put them out in the lobby, then I put them downstairs in the fellowship hall, then I put it in a closet. Nobody ever noticed. And it wasn't because I hate America, right? But it was because, for me, even in this context, in this space, there is something about the gospel from our faith perspective that I think is without regard to nationality. Yeah. And for some of us, July 4th has become this idol for us to worship at the altar of America that is centered on whiteness, America that is centered on theft, right? So these are the realities in which we live. So Independence Day for me a lot of folks have said this. I'm not saying anything new. But for me, I celebrated Juneteenth this year in a way that I never had before, right? Because if you think about when independence was attained for all of us, it didn't come until a lot later than 1776. Yeah. And even in that small time, we had in that small time of Reconstruction that lasted for a very short amount of time, it was quickly followed by the Jim Crow era, which was followed by civil rights and the fights that we're still having today, trying to remind people America never was, but America must be. And so all of the standing up, all the protesting is saying, we are not going to allow you to think that America is what you said it was. It is not, but it can be America. But it has never been, at least not to me, and folks who look like me.
I think you might find yourself discouraged and frustrated because it feels like it's not getting through, and we're slow to it, but I hope you know that we're hearing it differently today than we ever did before. I feel like we're having these, you're educating us in ways that we never saw this before. So what does a redemptive narrative look like in this process? I mean, what would be, some of the shifts that need to happen can take a long time. And maybe not even within our lifetime, some of us, I don't know. But as you look forward, as you look out you're in your work, what would you say would be redemptive so that that more of what is of what you've brought, what our Africans brought to, our slaves brought to the table, and how they contributed without getting any benefit, what would you say would be a redemptive way in which we could look towards the future?
Yeah, I think one, it was, of course you know this, but I have to say this. The reality is that, when enslaved Africans were brought here, it wasn't obviously a choice. It wasn't, the contribution was forced because it was that or death, right? But I think a redemptive process, I think when I think of redemption, which is a beautiful concept in our faith, right? The notion that this can be made right, the notion that you are not the sum totals of your mistake, right? That something beautiful can come from this mess. I think that redemption starts with acknowledgement, right? And that's the hard part sometimes, especially in church and in white America, is the acknowledgement, because for so many of my white siblings, I think they equate acknowledgement with admitting that I'm terrible, I'm full of guilt, right? So I think a redemptive path forward is acknowledgement without the guilt and the shame, because that's, it's interesting, guilt and shame, white guilt is interesting because it still centers. Yeah, right. Like the irony there is it still centers whiteness, right? I'm not asking you to somehow flog yourself and just hate yourself. I hate white people. That's not what I'm asking. Acknowledgement says, yes, this happened. Yes, this was wrong. Yeah, there still are systemic injustices, and I still have systemic advantages. So I'm going to acknowledge this and figure out how I can move forward with dismantling those things and leveling and bringing forth justice, right? So when I look with the lens toward redemption, I first look to see, I think the first thing is for my white siblings, to acknowledge what the reality is, and then figure out their part in making, in this context, America who it never has been. Yeah. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. So, again, there's so many things happening these days that I think so many of us are just, I guess, waking up to it. Didn't realize that the names of so many of our schools had such racist history to them. Or obviously we've known of the football teams or the sports teams that have had names that have been offensive or hurtful or not helpful. We're seeing different monuments being torn down. Again, this is like real time. This is now. For some of us, that is that's a good thing, and we're not sure what to do with it sometimes. How do you, I mean, you've been sitting with this your entire life, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Again, I'm trying to center this not on just the white conversation,
Yeah.
but on the black conversation. How would you?
I mean, we talked about this. I don't know if it was last week, a bit ago. It's an interesting thing, this time in which we find ourselves, because on one level, I feel like white America has gaslighted us, right? And now everybody is seeing it. It's like, y'all gaslighted us forever, and now for whatever reason, it's an interesting thing. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's so interesting that from George Floyd, that video, for whatever reason, that was akin. It was kind of similar to probably white folks seeing the hoses and the dogs being sicked on people during the civil rights movement. For whatever reason, that's jarred people. So, you feel gaslighted on one level, and on another level, I'm like, I'm glad y'all are seeing, because no matter how hard we work, black folks and brown folks who are committed to this work of anti-racism, if white folks aren't in the fight, if white folks aren't doing their work, I love the language you used before, you said that you all are interrogating yourselves, interrogating your systems, and that's such important work. It's part of that acknowledging work. It's part of that work that helps us see what we've not seen, even though it was right in front of us, right? Yeah. I think there is a part that, as a black man, it's like, all right, I don't know why y'all didn't trust us when we told y'all this a minute ago. We've been telling y'all this forever, but okay, whatever, for whatever reason y'all are seeing now, and that's important. And you talked about, the monuments and the names of sports teams and stuff. And again, I think it's a great thing that we're doing that work now. But I do think it's important for us not to miss the main thing in this conversation. The main thing in this conversation isn't necessarily changing the names of schools. It isn't necessarily tearing down monuments, although those things are great, and I support those 100%, right? Like, the main thing, and so what I don't want to happen is we start doing all of these things and we lose sight on what really is important, right? Not that those things aren't important, but if white folks don't do that work, if they can just shift the focus from themselves and doing that hard, painful introspection where you are testing your motives, where you are saying what's behind that, the same work that all of us have to do, it becomes a performance, right? It becomes a lot easier to paint a mural on a street than it does to ask the tough questions about, in my organization, where are we problematic and must we change? In this city, right? What are the policies that matter? Because you can paint all the murals you want, you can take down all the monuments, change all the names. If we haven't gotten to the main thing, if we haven't gotten to that sin of white supremacy, if we haven't exposed that festering sore, to use Dr. King's language, that festering sore to the daylight and the sanitizing work of the sun, we're going to be down this road again. Although, again, I mean, it's fine to, and I think it's necessary to tear down the monuments, to change the names. It's necessary, but it isn't the work. It's an outgrowth of the work.
That's good.
Right?
That's good.
So, especially those, I mean, I don't want to get, especially those Confederate monuments, especially when you think about the history and the context where those came from.
Yeah.
So, right, like you think about everybody, I was reading, interesting, after our conversation, I was like, I want to make sure I'm saying the right thing, because I mentioned when we were talking, like when those monuments went up, for the most of them, they coincided with the Jim Crow era. And those monuments are now what they have always been. It wasn't about honoring dead people, because when they wanted to honor dead people, you know where they put the monuments? In cemeteries, right?
Right.
When they wanted, these monuments now are what they have always been, signals about who they want, about the reality they want. It was a statement of fear, a statement of supremacy, right? It happened in the middle of Jim Crow. It happened to remind black folks who were doing really well under Reconstruction. In North Carolina, were leading at the time the most important city in the state, in Wilmington. You had black leadership, right? And white folks were like, we can't have this. And it was literally one of the only overthrows of government, violent overthrows of government in our country's history that happened because black folks were in charge. And then you have and around that time, after Reconstruction, and then on the ramp up during the Jim Crow era, going all from the late 1800s all the way to the 1900s, is where you had these monuments going up. And they happen, a lot of them happened very recently, relatively speaking. And these things, again, are what they've always been, signals about who they want, about the America they want. And the America they want is one where white men, especially, are supreme, but also white women, right? So all of those, we can't ever have conversations without looking at the context. Because you can listen to people say, man, these monuments are about, honoring the dead people who cared about states' rights, when it's like, no, bro, it isn't. I know that's what you've been told, and I feel bad for you. But pick up a book. Read something other than the trash you were taught in school that never taught you even about what happened in Wilmington. If the first time you're hearing about the overthrow of the government in Wilmington is from me today, ask yourself, what else have you heard? What else have you learned? What else must you yourself learn? Because I'll tell you this, I didn't learn this stuff in school either. Yeah, right. And for the better part of my education before college, I went to predominantly black schools. And I still didn't learn this, right? And so what else have you learned? What else must you take on yourself to learn and say, maybe what I've been taught, maybe how I felt about 4th of July or whatever is coming from a lens that is distorted, that had an agenda, that didn't include people who didn't look like my family, right? Maybe the nostalgia I have for the 4th of July or for the monuments is coming because I am who I am, and it included me. But who is it excluding, right?
Wow. So these monuments were built, I think you showed me an article, some of them in the 40s. Yes. Some of these Civil War monuments in the 40s. And to your point, they were just sort of this reminder of, hey, let me just define who we are and who you're not. Right. And so maybe for those of our white siblings who are saying we shouldn't be bringing these down, to understand that there's a way darker narrative behind this than even just the story of what that monument means, but it's an oppressive, modern-day statement. When you were telling me that, it was just no idea, no awareness of that.
Yeah, it's what's interesting I was reading, too, is the number of states that erected these monuments around over 30 states. There were only 11 states a part of the Confederacy, but over 30 states erected these monuments.
Which
and
means
you tell me,
some northern states.
Yes, only 11. There were only 11 Confederate states. Over 30 states have these monuments, and you tell me again, this is about honoring their dead. Yeah. No,
it's not history.
It is a signal to the living about who we are. And language is important. We use this language on purpose. We use the imagery on purpose, right? I mean, people, this isn't, these things aren't happening by accident. They're happening on purpose, and they have a reason for happening. Yeah.
That's so helpful, because I still think some of us white folks see this as, well, no, this is by accident. There's no way this could have been that intentional. But as you peel away the layers, you really do realize it was deeply intentional. And so as you guys are having any questions, feel free to sort of send those our way, and we'd love to be able to engage you in those. So one of the things, Ray, that we were talking about, and again, I think this is the beauty of the church, and this is why this conversation is so important in the church. You and I were talking about canceling culture, or cancel culture. And would you maybe summarize, explain a little bit what that looks like, and then in terms of, as a pastor, as a leader, as a minister of the gospel, what does it mean to engage that or not to engage that? Yeah,
that's a good question, man. I've been really thinking about this a lot. So cancel culture, to kind of try to define it, and even since we talked, I've gotten so much feedback from, I kind of posted this question on my Facebook, and I've gotten so much feedback that made me think about this even in a way I didn't think about it less than a week ago. But one definition that's been given to cancel culture is cancel culture. Basically is when a person's done something that is unacceptable, kind of breaks some of the social mores, we just say, you're done. It's kind of like, you did this and you're out. This isn't good. Like for me, like when I think about cancel culture, and I'm still processing this myself, so this is where I am right now.
Yeah, right.
I think the problem I have with cancel culture is that I don't think it, especially in our faith tradition, I think it leaves the person where they were, and it gives no room for a person changing. And I could be wrong, but so cancel culture basically says you did something wrong, we're calling you out, you're out, you're canceled. We don't mess with you no more, right? And there are times, I believe, obviously, where a person needs to have, I think cancel culture is different than accountability. Yeah. In my mind, it has been. Some folks see it as accountability, and I can appreciate the differences we have.
Is this something that happens in black culture and white culture, or is it exclusive to one?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Cancel culture is something that happens all around. And some folks, and when I posted this, actually had an interesting perspective that the term even cancel culture came from people who were canceled, right? So that's an interesting perspective. But I think for me, when I think about it, because I mean, everybody's been canceled. I've been canceled before, for whatever reason, right? And I'm like, why did I get canceled? I don't know why you got canceled. All right, but I'm canceled. These are the people who say they don't F with you, they don't mess with you. Yeah. And that's all well and good, but for me, as a person of faith, maybe it's an occupational hazard as a pastor, I have to believe that for us, at the core of our faith, is this idea of redemption. It's this idea that this too can be made right. And so I don't like leaving a person where they were. I don't believe people, no matter how heinous they are I don't believe they are the sum total of their mistakes, right? And this kind of is an interesting segue. I think sometimes when we talk about the work of anti-racism and kind of this exposure that's happening and this enlightenment, if you will, to white folks in a larger context, I think some of the fear and the pushback from white folks is because they are like, yo, is white about to go totally out of style? Are people about to cancel white altogether? Like, gotcha. Am I going to do I need to now become ashamed of being white? And I don't think so. I don't think that's helpful or healthy, right? I think sometimes when people hear us talk about anti-racism, they hear us talking about the sin of white supremacy, they hear us saying, you're wrong for being white, right? Just like we know our immutable qualities are things we can't change about ourselves as black folks. It's not like you chose to be white. So I'm not saying be ashamed of yourself for being white. I'm saying have the same perspective I have. I mean, I'm not at all ashamed of myself for being black, and I'm proud to be black, right? I don't see that as something, because it's foolish. Like, why would you be ashamed of something that you didn't have any role in? And maybe on the same level, why you be proud of it in a way that says, I'm better than you, right? Like, I'm like, all right, God and God's wisdom and God's omniscience decided that he should make me this beautiful and black, and you that beautiful and white. So instead of thinking, I need to be ashamed of this, it's thinking, how am I going to do, what am I going to do to be an anti-racist? So I don't get special privileges because I'm white, and this person shouldn't get demerits because they're not white, right? I'm not canceling you. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying you should feel guilty, because again, I don't think guilt is healthy. Right? I don't think it's a good motivator. I've been around some white folks, so I'm like, bro, like, come on, like, you calm down. They're like, I hate white folks. I'm like, well, bro, I don't hate white folks. Let's get that straight. I don't hate white folks per se, and I feel like you need a hug. I'm not saying you need to hate yourself, but you need to check yourself and your siblings and your cousins and your grandma, right? And say, how are we problematic, just like I need to do, right? I need to do those things. And we've talked about this before. I need to do those things in every area, because all of us. Here's what's so insidious about white supremacy. just as much as you've been steeped in it, I've been steeped in it, right? This culture, in America, the plumb line, the standard is whiteness. And so we have to shift our mindset to say, you know what? The standard shouldn't be whiteness, right? The standard should be who we are. Like I don't have to try to sound like a white person, right, in order to be non-threatening. No, that's ridiculous. That's the type of stuff we need to change. Yeah. Like how are we really able to allow people to be their most beautiful, authentic, life-giving selves in the moment without us having to understand it all? There's parts of white culture I just don't understand, right? I'm sure there are parts of black culture you just don't understand. And I'm like, y'all do y'all. I don't understand. I mean, I'm not going to point out some stuff because I ain't trying to have y'all at me. But there are just some parts I don't understand. I'm like, all right, do you? I don't understand it, but
we
do you,
wouldn't
bro.
Cancel you. We wouldn't cancel you.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been canceled already, so I'm good.
No,
we can
that's
survive. But anyway, I'm rambling now.
No, that's good, Ray. I mean, there's so much I want to continue to pull from that. I want a couple of questions from our folks. Sarah asked the question, how do we elevate the conversation out of left, right, liberal, conservative, us, them?
That's beautiful. Man, that's a good question, Sarah. One, I do think that there are binaries. I don't think it's us and them as far as like black and white. I think it's folks who are who recognize and understand the need for anti-racism and folks who don't. But I do believe because when we just scream at people, and I've been accused of that, and I think some people, any type of accountability, any calling out things that aren't right, they say you scream and you're being divisive. And I've learned that sometimes we need to be divisive, right? But I think at the core of coming from that space of left and right, whatever, is relationships. And there are some folks who would disagree with me, but I think relationships is the key, and not fake relationships, but real relationships. And that's the reason this work isn't. That's the reason this work is like trying to turn the Titanic. It's long-range work. It doesn't just happen on a dime. This work, of creating that beloved community happens in relationship, and it happens over time, which doesn't mean we just settle and say, well, there's nothing we can do. But it's deep relationships. It's I believe it's offering grace to people, and it's recognizing that I am not the center of this universe. That's something I'll never forget when I think about faith, our faith especially. I mean, I'll throw it back. There's this. I don't agree with what this person. Probably me today would not agree with this person, but this illustration sticks in my mind by Bill Bright, and he talks about like dethroning ourselves, right? So in our faith tradition, what happens is we take ourselves from the center and we put Christ there, right? So we are not the center. So and maybe in this context, I dethrone myself. I'm not the center of the world. So if Christ is at the center of the world and me, looking like Christ, loving like Christ is at the center, it makes it less us and them and more how do I serve my neighbor? How do I love my neighbor well, even when we have disagreements? And I think I said this the last time. And sometimes there are disagreements that we have that it really will necessitate the severing of a relationship. If our disagreement centers on my right to exist, we can't disagree. We can't agree to disagree on that, right? But if it's on certain things, we can agree to disagree and still be in a relationship, right? So relationship, in my opinion, is at the center of that, but also grace, and then taking ourselves from the center of the world, right?
So the connection to what we get to do, the work we get to do as people of the Christ, right? There's so much we could spend in that space, but I want to jump in another question here. One of our sisters here, Tina, said, if my white friends have no relationships with people of color, I think you probably answered, how can change begin? Pursue those relationships. Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, this whole idea of relationship is interesting because our relationships mostly happen from work or where we live, and or worship. And every one of those places are segregated for the most part, right? And so it means really it's a shift. It's a lot, right? So it might mean not sending your kid to the charter school, or might mean sending your kid, or I'm not throwing shade at charter schools per se, because like our kids are at magnet school, so it might not mean taking your kid to the magnet school. It might mean having relationships that are not on your terms, and be like putting yourself in a space where you're uncomfortable at first, and then you're having to adapt instead of your friends, right? Having to adapt, and because one thing that we've had to learn, non-white folks in America, is we've had to learn how to become comfortable in our discomfort in your spaces. The problem is largely white folks don't have to learn that. They don't have to learn how to deal with the discomfort and the awkwardness of being the only white person, but we do. So it's a similar thing, putting aside our comforts, putting aside ourselves, and saying, but it has to be somebody with whom you have some type of something connected to. It can't just be like, all right, I pick you. You're my white now. You're mine now. We're friends, and you have nothing in common. It just, you know what I mean? Like it just gets awkward. But just people, I don't know. And so it just means putting ourselves in different spaces, and that's hard work.
So based on that, I mean, it's so good. So based on that, our community of color here, who work so hard, who are taking, and they're probably exhausted at times because they're trying to bring us along, and the conversation is so often centered on the white narrative. Again, like to try not to center it on white people in this moment, if you could pastor and shepherd for a moment our watershed people of color, our community of color here, what would you say to them?
I would say to my black siblings, there is reason for hope. I don't know that we've ever been in, this is an interesting time for the church, because we are laying bare everything. I've never seen a movement where it's not just kind of emergent liberal folks are having these conversations, but also evangelicals are having this conversation, and it's a reason for hope. But but I will say also this, like, it is not your responsibility, black folks, non-white folks, to bear this. You can't teach people what they don't want. So give yourself permission to stop. Give yourself permission to not think it is your job. And if it comes to it, this is what I always say to folks, because I know what it's like to be the only black person, or one of the few black persons, certainly only black person on staff, and one of the few black person worshiping at a church. And there are days when you just feel invisible. Don't let those days be too many, because you deserve to be seen. And if where you're worshiping, even if it's here, if they're not seeing you, if they are making you come on their terms, it's time to find another place that will value you and see you and love you and know you. But the reason for hope is that we, in our faith tradition as Christians, we are following in the footstep of a God who is not unfamiliar with our sufferings. When you look at Christ and who Christ was and what Christ stood for, we know that Christ stands with us. And if you have any doubts in your mind that you are beautiful, that you are made wonderfully in the image of God, let me disabuse you of that. No matter how people have made you feel, each of us have this imago Dei, this image of God, and each of us are called to be who we are perfectly, beautifully, without pretense. So keep your head up. We are in, I think, an interesting time, not just as the church, but as America, where no longer can people act like they don't know. And that's because of your persistence. That's because you have not allowed people to tell you what you know to be true. And when people have wanted to tell you to be quiet, you've spoken louder. So keep your head up, my siblings, and know that this too will be made right. And just like Langston Hughes, we will make America. Amen.
Oh, that's good. That's good. So, Ray, thank you for being with us. I know our community, like I said earlier, has benefited so much. I have personally enjoyed the burgeoning friendship that I've been able to find in this, and hopefully you as well, and just look forward to future conversations. Having you here in Charlotte has been so amazing. I can't wait till this auditorium can be full of people and we can have you up here as well. So Ray has some amazing work in which he's doing these days. He comes around organizations, he comes around individuals, he comes around nonprofits, and he can have these conversations with you in your organization. And I have, Ray has this ability to be able to extend grace when maybe we don't deserve it, but the way he is able to communicate and to share and to kind of take a narrative and a story and give it an understanding is really, really meaningful. And so if you are interested in having Ray be a part of an experience with your company, your nonprofit, maybe you're an individual and you say, a lot of us white folks, we love to hire coaches, life coaches to help us in all these other areas of our lives. Well, what's it mean to possibly bring somebody like a Ray into your world and open up your eyes to understanding this really the whiteness that is interpreting how you see reality that's not always ideal. So there's a bunch of different ways in which he can come in and be a part of your life and your reality. So RayMcKinnon.com, he's all over social media. You must follow him. There's some great stuff going on. And again, if you have any questions or you need to get a hold of him, you can also reach out to us. We'd be glad to put you in touch with him as well. Ray, thank you for being with us today. We really do love you and your family and look forward to just more of this is ahead.
Amen. Appreciate it, bro. God bless you guys. Thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Love you guys.